Welcome to Washington Post Live. This afternoon, I'm joined by Linda McMahon. She's a longtime business associate and trusted advisor of President Trump. She and her husband, Vince, ran and built World Wrestling Entertainment into a billion-dollar business. She then headed the Small Business Administration under President Trump, and she left that position last year in order to head the super PAC, America First Action. It's the largest PAC supporting the president in his re-election campaign. So on this third day of the Republican National Convention, please join me in welcoming Linda McMahon. Thank you for joining us, Linda.
Thank you, Francis.
Well, it's a great pleasure to have you. And you know the president probably as well as anybody else. When you're thinking about tomorrow night and his speech, what do you, as an old-time friend and long-time business associate, think his most compelling message will be?
Well, I think the president is going to continue to talk about the things that he has done while he's been president. First of all, then I think he'll look forward. But he will talk about his successes in lowering taxes, rolling out regulations, better trade deals, and unleashing the energy sector. Those have been his strong suits. He's created so many jobs. Unemployment was at an all-time low. African Americans and Hispanics had the best unemployment record in history. And women, I think, had their best employment numbers going back 70 years. He's going to tout those accomplishments, and he should, because they are very, very worthwhile. He's been an absolute excellent president in keeping the promises that he made. I think going forward, you're going to look to hear him talk about more tax increases. I don't want to get ahead of him, but I think he's already released some of these things. He's going to be talking about more tax reductions, especially for the middle class. And he really does want to bring more manufacturing jobs back to this country. And if he's he may incentivize large corporations to come back. We want our supply chain to be here. We want things to be made in America. We'd rather be exporters than importers of all of the things that we need for manufacturing. He wants to continue to create more jobs and have the United States be independent and not reliant upon countries like China and others for the very basic things that we need. And I think we saw during the COVID epidemic how important that is. So I think he's going to be talking about all of those forward-looking things to continue to get back to, if you will, the robust economy that we had prior to COVID, and even to do better with that.
Well, yes, we have seen some jobs coming back, although millions remain unemployed, and also stocks have rebounded. But what does that mean for the men and women who work on Main Street, the working and middle-class people who are on our main streets across the country?
Well, there are a lot of those people who have not been able to go back to their jobs simply because they're still closed. Some of those states still haven't reopened. Some have tried reopening. COVID had a surge. They've had a partial shutdown again. So there just aren't those businesses, obviously, that have not been able to reopen 100% the way they were. I know just here in my hometown, and I live here in Greenwich, Connecticut, many of the restaurants have not reopened. Some are still closed. They have carry-out, they have curb service, but they're not, fully open and functioning. Hair salons are really coming back, though, because we do have a lot of influx of people coming in from New York who'll come over to Greenwich and who are moving into Greenwich from New York. So some areas, some cities are seeing that, but Main Street America in the Midwest, where they haven't been hit as hard so far, they're still open and flourishing, but we have to watch out for the rural areas as well. But there's still a lot of people whose businesses just haven't been able to reopen, even those who had some help from PPP, who kept employees on board for a good while. Now that ended at the end of July, so they're in a little bit of a flux again. So there still are people that are out of work. But I think what we've seen, oh my goodness, look at how many jobs have been created in the last 3 months. I mean, July, 1.8 million, and over the last 3 months, over 9 million jobs. And if you reflect on history a little bit and look back to the Great Recession, it took 4 years to create 9 million jobs after that. And we've done it. This administration, President Trump, has done that in the last 3 months. So I think you are seeing that economic rebound, and we're going to get back pretty quickly, I think, to our full employment numbers. And but everybody just has to keep working at it.
Yeah, so the Census Bureau has released information suggesting that small business owners think the recovery is going to be slower. that many will not be able to come back at all, and others will remain in a slow process of recovery way into next year. What should the president be doing now to reassure those people and to counter that?
Well, I think what he is doing is asking for Congress to come back and pass that next stimulus round. I mean, he did sign his executive order and to get unemployment back into the hands of those that were still out of work, about $300 on top of their weekly supplement from the states. I think 30 states have come in on board with that. He's hoping for more that will come in, so that is helpful for those people who are still unemployed. But you'll have restaurant owners who took PPP and they're trying to get their employees back and to keep them on board, but yet if they can't have their customers come in, after a while it just doesn't make any sense, because they still have to pay all of their rent, they have to do all of the things that they normally would have to do. And so the stimulus hasn't been sufficient. So the president really would like to pass another stimulus package. I don't know all the details of that, but he clearly thinks that's important. He thinks that's the work of Congress and would like them to come back and pass that next stimulus package, because it is so important to keep this economy growing.
So America First just announced this massive ad buy, 18.6 million, I think, targeted at some of the battleground states, North Carolina, Florida among them. And it's critical of Biden's plans, Wisconsin included, yes, it's critical of Biden's plans. And tries to put the emphasis on the economy rather than the pandemic. Do you truly believe the economy can recover before we conquer the pandemic, conquer the coronavirus?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think what we have seen is, and what the president did at first, he shut everything down. He had to. We didn't know what this virus was. It came on, it was rapidly spreading, people were dying, so it was just a total shutdown for, I think, approximately 2 months. And then when we started learning more about it, we started seeing some therapeutic treatments, not many so much at first, but understanding that wearing masks and social distancing were being effective. And so now this slow reopening of our businesses, of more of our main streets, have really shown that they can be effective and that we don't have to totally shut down everything. I think the next hurdle is going to be schools, to see how our schools are going to reopen throughout many different states. Some have all online, some have partial online, partial in person, some have split classes during the day. Some students come in the first half, some come in the second half, and that's pretty much up to the states. But we really have to get our kids back in school. One of the ways that the economy is impacted is that many women had to leave the workforce because they needed to be at home to help with homeschooling, or the fact now that their kids weren't in school, so they had to give care to their children. And what we have found that is when women leave the workforce, the longer they're out of the workforce, the harder it is for them to come back in. So we clearly wanted to make it able for women to return to the workforce as well. So I think that, yes, we need to get COVID under control. And I think the president, through his warp speed program for vaccine development, which includes different kinds of vaccines, the antibody vaccine, the other kinds of vaccines, and I'm not a medical expert, I really can't speak, to those as well, but also as we look at therapeutic remedies, remdesivir. And I know there's been some controversy about, a couple of the other drugs, but they have proved effective in some ways when used early. And so I think there are many ways to attack this pandemic, and I think we're doing it really well in the United States. And so that is going to help get more and more control over COVID, more wide openings, and our hospitals now are not at maximum capacities, and that's what we needed to do. We needed to make sure, first and foremost, that our medical facilities were not overrun. They are not now. They have capacity, and they have the PPE equipment that they need. So all of these things combined, getting control over COVID, reopening safely, with the scientific data involved, is the way we're going to bring the country back, and we're seeing that it's working.
Well, let's talk a little bit about a part of the country where Joe Biden may have a more appeal than Hillary Clinton did in 2016, and that's the Rust Belt. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer thanked Biden for rescuing the auto industry there. What should Trump be doing in those parts of the country to persuade voters that a Trump administration, another Trump administration, is the way to go for them?
Well, I think the president is doing that. I mean, clearly, well, first of all, let's look at a little bit of law and order with the unions for, the police departments that are so much backing the president. And we have so much that's going on in our country now. I mean, I honestly think the Democratic Party has to be careful because right now it's being looked at more as the lockdown party and the anarchist party, if you will, because look what is going on in so many of these big cities across the country. And it's just continuing and continuing, and the governors and the mayors aren't really doing anything about it. Even at the Democratic convention, he didn't even didn't have one word about what's going on in these big cities. Now, when you look at the police or the first responders or the workers and the small businesses who are they might have just rebuilt from COVID, and now their businesses is burned or they destroyed and they can't go back. I mean, these are all things that I think are not being well received relative to those would-be supporters for Biden.
But tell me, from your experience as SBA administrator, what did you see Trump do specifically in these Rust Belt states to help workers?
Well, as the SBA administrator, I mean, I actually went to all 50 states. I went to all 68 district offices throughout the country. And the main thing with small businesses was tax reduction and regulatory rollback. Those two things help more for small businesses to grow, to spend their money within their businesses, to hire new people, to have more innovation in what they were doing. And I was told throughout the country that that tax relief meant so much to them that they were able to reinvest and to hire more in their businesses.
So you referred at the beginning of our discussion to raising taxes and lowering taxes. On your website, you're very critical of Joe Biden for proposed raises in taxes. Now, those taxes could cover things like cheaper or free healthcare for people, college tuition relief, those sorts of things. What is Trump proposing to do to help people who have been burdened by debts in those areas if he's not going to raise taxes?
Well, a robust economy creates a lot of money to pay for, to repayment of loans, to give people jobs. I do think that he has provided some relief by postponing, college payments. So I think that the president is really looking at all of those areas so that the economic recovery will continue to be strong.
The other issue you raised at the beginning is one I wanted to ask you about is China, of course, bringing jobs back from China. Again, your website is very critical of Biden, saying he helped bring China into the World Trade Organization at the cost of American jobs. But tell me about Trump. How should he move forward in relationships with China? Do you want him to play hardball, or do you think a softer approach is appropriate at this moment?
I think the president has the best sense of how to deal with China, and he's clearly been successful in what he's done before. The first round of the trade agreements, they are, according to the latest information I've heard, they are complying with that first round. They are buying billions of dollars worth of crops from our farmers, which was really a significant part of the trade agreement. I think as we move forward, we want to look at more IP protection. And that is very important to small and large businesses, is to have the products that they are inventing and the processes of being creative, the innovation that they're showing, that they are protecting. And I think that's something the president will continue to want to solidify with these negotiations. I think the president has shown that he's incredibly angry at the fact that China actually released this pandemic on the world, not just the United States, but over 180 countries. And I think he's been very clear about how angry he is about that and how it did not have to happen. Thank goodness he did close the borders to China and then to Europe, and to save millions of lives at the beginning of the pandemic. But I think the president will have the right approach with China. He has shown that he has, I think, his finger on that pulse, and he'll change. There are some things that he will be more agreeable about, and there's some things that he'll take a very hard line with. Negotiator Lighthizer, and has just been tremendous in his negotiating, with China, and that will continue as well.
So another area that you're highly critical of Biden on your website is what you say his sacrifice of jobs in order to advance, I think you called an extreme environmentalist agenda. Do you see prospects for increasing green jobs, green energy jobs?
You know, from
Under a
if
Trump
it were a
administration,
president-
would you? Yeah.
I'm sorry, under a Trump
Would
administration.
you
or Biden?
advocate? Would you advocate increased numbers of green energy jobs, or not at all?
Well, I think where it makes sense, and I think the president clearly has not said he is against green jobs or against anything like that. But what he does realize is that fossil fuels are a critical part of right now the economy and the energy sector of not only the United States but the world, where we would export to. So he is a strong proponent of fossil fuels, and he knows that we can't just eliminate them. As we move forward for other forms of energy, he would definitely support that. But he's not going to totally sacrifice all of the jobs in America and not being able to satisfy the needs of the rest of the world by simply moving to an all-green agenda, as certainly Vice President Biden has indicated he wants to get to.
I can't help but thinking, as we talk about this, of the wildfires blazing in California and the hurricane impending, about to hit the Texas and Louisiana coast, both climate-related disasters. How do you evaluate the human and economic costs of disasters like that?
Well, I can tell you, I do think that we all, as human beings and countries, do contribute, to the environment changing. And I do think the environment does change, and we have to all be aware of that and do what we can to make sure that we're protecting it on a global basis. I think the United States is certainly willing to do its part. But look, the carbon footprint in the United States has been reduced, and you know what? The private sector did it. Industry did it. They put their own regulations on it. And I think that's what we will continue to do, and to see that it makes good business sense to reduce the amount of carbon, that may be released. And industry is going to continue to look at ways, to control that carbon that's released and to bring it down, and even to get it to a point where it might be zero carbon. And industry will do that because it does make sense and it's good business.
So you foresee a future with a lower carbon footprint in this country, a smaller carbon footprint?
Yes, as businesses continue to innovate on how to continue to create the energy that we need and continue to decrease that carbon footprint, they'll do it.
So we're in this peculiar situation with a virtual convention, and the Trump campaign has struggled to attract big donors. Do you see this convention as a way of reigniting and energizing those big donors? And how do you propose to do so?
Well, I don't know that I would say that the Trump has not been able to attract big donors. I don't know how you're defining that. I mean, we've had $5 to $10 million donors. And our July numbers, were really good. There are a lot of donors that sit back and wait till the final months, and some of them don't come in until after Labor Day. And our donors are coming in now. And in fact, we're probably going to have an incredibly successful month in August. We did in July as well. And so I'm pleased at where our donors, are coming in. They're stepping up to the plate, and we're getting some good numbers.
And how confident are you that this convention will galvanize those big donors?
I think the convention is really. I think conventions, Democrats and Republicans, pretty much address the base. Though I do think there are swing voters that do watch. So I think that as we continue to put our numbers out, that we see. Polling, getting very, very tight. As a matter of fact, in our own polling, we have the president up in a couple of our states, and we have a couple of races where they're tied. So we're definitely seeing our internal polling showing that this is a very, very tight race. And I'm very confident that on November 3rd, Donald Trump will be reelected as president of the United States.
So we've talked about some of the struggles. Go ahead.
Also a donor. So I'm very convinced that he's going to be.
We've talked a little bit about small business owners and their struggles, but tell me about corporate CEOs. What do you do to convince people who run big corporations that Trump is the right person to reelect?
Well, I think you've seen that companies have come back, manufacturing has come back. There has been more onshoring, if you will, of jobs under President Trump. And I also believe that as he looks at incentivizing other bigger companies to come back, especially pharmaceutical companies, to give them incentives to come back and to produce product here. I mean, he's come down hard on big pharma. He has, talked about this favored nations clause in policy that he believes is right for the United States to bring costs down to be on par, with the rest of the world, that the United States citizens shouldn't have to pay more, than the citizens of other countries. So, but the way that pharmaceutical companies then can make up for that is to make their product here in the United States. And let's all work together to make sure that we can bring down the costs of that manufacturing by making the regulatory environment, the right regulatory environment, for production and for manufacturing, and not overly regulate. And I still think there is room to go for our manufacturing processes so that we are not over-regulated.
So as we move into this fall and winter season, and we potentially have a recurrence of COVID and also flu and cold season, how optimistic are you about keeping small businesses like restaurants open? And a second part to that question, what's happening with WWE, with your own business? What precautions are you taking?
Well, I'm really not a spokesperson for WWE anymore. I'm not an officer there. I'm not even on the board. I'm a shareholder, so I watch what WWE does, but I'm really not a spokesperson for WWE. But in terms of where businesses are going to be in the fall, I think it's just, we're going to have to wait and see. I am optimistic that businesses are going to continue to be able to reopen and to stay open, because we will have more therapeutic drugs to treat coronavirus. I think it will last, and it will last a shorter period of time. It won't be as deadly as it's been. Our hospitals are prepared. The president, really went to great lengths to make sure that we had ventilators that we are making now in this country and shipping to other countries. He wanted to make sure that we had all the PPE equipment. When he took over from the Obama-Biden administration, I mean, you've heard him say the cupboards were bare in terms of PPE equipment and ventilators, and it was almost really gearing up and starting and even using, the defense provisions to make sure that companies would step up to the plate and manufacture these. He didn't have to use it often, but he did some, and he didn't hesitate where he needed to make sure that we could resupply, our stockpiles, be able to ship to hospitals, and to make sure we didn't get in that situation again. So I think the therapeutic treatments and remedies, hopefully we're going to have a vaccine in the fall. I mean, it's going, to quote, warp speed. FDA is really fast tracking things like, the antibody vaccines. I know that was walked back a little bit this week in terms of, its overall success, but I think there's real hope for that. And as we look at ways to treat and control COVID, if we all continue to practice social distancing, wearing our masks in areas where we can't social distance, we've learned a lot. And I think we're going to be better served in the fall, obviously, than we were when this pandemic hit, when nobody knew what it was and how to get a handle on it. But we've learned a lot now.
I'd like to spend the next few minutes talking about a group of voters, women, and suburban women in particular. You've known President Trump for a long time. What has he done to help a successful woman like you model a career as a woman for other women who are out there and ambitious women?
Well, if you go back to small businesses, women create more small businesses. They, sometimes it starts as a cottage industry or whatever, and so they start to grow these small businesses. They hire 5, 6, 7 people. And I'm not just talking about some of the small business that you would think about that we might stereotypically look at with women, like hair salons and nail salons. I'm looking at tech companies and tech businesses that they'll start in their home, and that they'll be able to, to branch out and to hire people. So when you had tax relief come in, when you had regulatory relief come in, when you had the SBA, which is on the ground with its 68 district offices, having women's business centers that women could go to and understand how to pitch their business, how to approach banks, how to get loans, all of these things under the Trump administration, I saw them firsthand. I met with many of the women in the business, women, they're called WBCs, Women Business Centers, and they were actively interacting with young entrepreneurs. sometimes entrepreneurs can be geniuses in what they're creating or the business they're developing, but they really don't know how to write a business plan, and they don't know how to pitch their business to banks. So, relieving banking regulations and freeing up money supply to businesses that were starting, all good things that help grow the number of businesses and jobs. 2 out of 3 net new jobs are created by small businesses, and half of our GDP in the country are really from small businesses. So it's incredibly important. Women are a huge part of that workforce, and that's one of the ways that women were incentivized to grow.
Both at the SBA and at the Super PAC, you meet women from all sorts of walks of life. How do you persuade never-Trumpers to consider voting for Trump? What's your line?
Well, yeah, you have to continue to look at what he's accomplished. How much better did the economy get? How many jobs were there created? And it's not, believe me, as big a leap as it might have been at one time. And I constantly, everybody doesn't like the president's personality. I think the first lady even indicated last night that you're never, you always know what the president's thinking, even sometimes when you might not like it. And I think I always look at what has he delivered, look at substance over style sometimes. I've known him for a long, long time, and I wish actually that more people would get to know kind of the other side of Donald Trump, one that's not seen so much in his public view.
Talk to me. I mean, he's known for his epithets, many of them, and nicknames, many of them directed against women. Nervous Nancy, Evita, we know them all. Do you think they hurt his prospects with suburban women in particular?
Maybe some. There are a lot of people that don't like nicknames or epithets, as you call them. But, that's him. That's his personality. And I think you take some of that. You take some of the good with bad. But I think that it is clearly substance over style and what he's accomplished. No one, I don't think, can argue with where our economy was before COVID came in and the steps that have been taken in our country to really, to raise all of our living standards, across the country. I mean, we saw wage growth at the lower 25% of income levels. We saw, as I mentioned before, Hispanics and African Americans having jobs at records that, beyond what was recorded in the record books, and women back as far as 70 years. These are all accomplishments. We had a solid economy. People were at a great optimistic level about where the country and the economy and their business was going to be next year. We took a back step with COVID. We're regaining that ground, and we're regaining that economy on the V shape, as we've talked about, and we're going to see it come back strong.
And one last question, I think. At the end of the day, how important to Trump's re-election is this group of suburban women, in your view?
Well, I think, all voters are clearly necessary for him to get elected. I do think suburban women, and you know what, suburban women, we have found a couple of things they're very concerned about. One is suburban women do not like the idea of socialism. They are very much against socialism. They believe in capitalism. They believe if you're working hard, you ought to be able to reap the benefits of your reward. And the other thing that suburban women do not like and become very concerned about is safety. Safety for their children, for their home, for their environment, and when they're looking at what's happening in many of these large cities around the country, they're very concerned about that. And we're seeing more and more of, some shifting in attitudes. And when we shift attitudes, then we start to shift the poll and the ballot numbers, and we're seeing that start to happen.
So you believe a law and order message could work for suburban women?
I think it's part of the messaging that does work for suburban women, for sure.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Linda McMahon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's all we have time for today with you. It was a fascinating conversation. Tomorrow, our guests will include White